Hey, come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas, Austin, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Get your tickets at jimmydore.com. That's where they're the most affordable. I was reading over at the Architects and Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, and they say former Pennsylvania Congressman Curt Weldon, who previously had a career in firefighting, is coordinating with AE 9/11 Truth and other researchers in the 9/11 Truth movement to present the incoming Trump administration with a proposal for a presidential commission to re-examine the 9/11 evidence. Weldon, who maintains strong connections to Washington, D.C., including the members of the incoming Trump administration, described the 9/11 commission as a joke and a cover-up and says he wants to help A&E 9/11 Truth get its evidence. When I watched the film that was shown to me and I saw a New York firefighter enter floor 78 of the tower and report back verbally that he saw 2 fires and could handle them, and 5 minutes later the building collapses, I said, wait a minute, this is outrageous. I can't believe that we haven't investigated this before now. So I've had on here Professor Emeritus from University of Alaska who debunked the whole official story on how Building 7 fell down. And I always say in my comedy act that if you think Building 7 fell into its own footprint because a plane hit another building hundreds of yards away, I've got a vaccine I'd like to sell you. So we've already debunked that the official narrative about that Building 7 did not fall down the way the United States government said it did. What do you think? What is the cover-up, and what do you want people to know about 9/11?
First of all, I want to applaud you. I'm aware of your work. I'm aware of your leadership, and I'm aware of your guts. And I know you've made a career out of being a comedian, but you have a very strong side to doing the right thing for the country, not based on political parties, but what's best for America. And I applaud you for that. I feel I'm the same way, but I'm not a comedian. Some people may think I'm a comedian, but I'm not a comedian. You are, and I applaud you for your work. I was at 9/11 in 93. I went up at the invitation of Fire Commissioner Howard Safer, and I spent the day at Ground Zero. I was there with FBI and ATF, and they assigned a young fire officer to take me through the bombed-out parking garage. That young officer was Ray Downey. I became good friends with Ray. Ray was a former Marine, 5 kids. His 2 sons today. One has the same job Ray had, rescue chief for New York. The other's director of training for New York City Fire Department. Ray convinced me that I should introduce legislation to create a commission in case of another attack. So I introduced the legislation that became law that created the Gilmore Commission. It was named the Gilmore Commission because the chairman was Virginia Governor Jim Gilmore, who's an outstanding man of integrity. He was ambassador for the U.S. to 54 countries, and I had him on a podcast back on 9/11 last year. And Jim spoke for 20 minutes about the report they did. After 93, we made recommendations to deal with another terrorist attack.
You mean
5 reports.
Oh, so that was after the first Trade Center?
After the first Trade Center, exactly. One of those recommendations was to create a fusion center of our 33 classified intelligence systems. I was the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, and in that position, I was the chairman of all research funding, which was over $100 billion a year, funding all of our military research. The services were standing up information dominance centers, and the Army had a capability that really impressed me at Fort Belvoir. I convinced our Deputy Secretary of Defense to go down and look at it. He agreed with me. We made a proposal in my office on November the 4th of 1999 to create what we call a NOAA, National Operation Analysis Hub, policymaker and warfighters tool to deal with emerging transnational terrorist threats. 2 years before 9/11, at the suggestion of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I had an FBI vice chairman and the vice chairman of the CIA in my office. The Deputy Secretary of Defense said, I think it's a great idea. I'll manage it. I said, I'll get it funded. The FBI said, we support it. And the CIA said, we don't need it. We don't need it. The biggest problem on 9/11 was none of that data from those 33 classified intelligence programs was linked together. Then I find out. I'm in my office on 9/11 in the Rayburn building, and I get a call, a frantic call, from the Army military people down at Fort Belvoir. We got to see you right away. We got to show you what we were doing. They bring the charts to my office and roll them out on my desk. They had identified every cell of Al Qaeda by name in the world a year earlier. Every one of them. They had identified the linkages to the 5 key cells, including New York. Now, Jimmy, I put this in a congressional record. They tried to stop me from doing it. The Senate wouldn't let any other member of that task force speak. I spoke before the Senate and testified. We had pre-9/11 intelligence that Louis Freeh, not me, Louis Freeh, our former FBI director, said in a Wall Street Journal editorial and on Good Morning America, and I can give you copies of both. He said if we'd have had that information, we could have stopped 9/11 from happening. But it gets worse than that. It gets worse than that. This book, you got to get a copy of it, called Horse Soldiers. It was written about our commanding general of our special forces that ride horses, General Keith Lambert. New York Times bestseller. They made a movie about it. So I didn't know General Lambert, but I got a copy of his book. On page 27, he's interviewed by the author. General, what were your feelings when 9/11 happened? And General Keith Lambert says on page 27, within seconds, I knew who had done the attack. I knew it involved Muhammad Atta because I had been briefed on a top secret intelligence program run by the Army. Yet there's none of that in the 9/11 Commission report. Zelikow led a whitewash. Tony Shaffer, who was one of the lead people on the Able Danger team, and I wrote the manuscript for that. They tried to ruin his career. He wrote his book called Dark Heart. It was okayed by his commanding general. And then the deep state found out he was writing a book. So you know what they did? They bought all 10,000 copies of the first edition of Dark Heart with taxpayer money. And they destroyed them. Then they let Tony publish the book Redacted. I had Tony on my podcast. I'll get him on your podcast if you want him. Lieutenant Colonel, Bronze Star recipient, American hero. And Tony testified under oath. He testified to me. I said, Tony, when you published your book, you had a redacted version and the original version. What did they want out of your book? What was so sensitive? They didn't want Zelikow's name in his book. They didn't want the public to know that Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer and his team had briefed the 9/11 Commission on what they knew before 9/11. I'm telling you right now, without any hesitation, 9/11 Commission was a deliberate cover-up by both administrations. And I'm not some conspiracy theorist. I was the chairman of the Oversight Committee for Military Research. I was funding the program, and I'll take a polygraph.
So do you think...
Now, what you're hearing now are the stories about the buildings. I'm not a building engineer. I had my doubts. And you pointed out what I said, which really struck me in a film the firefighters produced in 2020. I could hear the audio voice of one of the most respected firefighters in New York City, Captain Oreo Palmer. He was one of the most respected members of the New York City Fire Department. He and his team took an elevator up to the 50th floor of Tower 1. Then they got off the elevator and they walked 28 floors up to the floor where the plane hit. They got in the floor where the plane hit, and you can hear him say, as clear as day, I'm here. I'm on the floor of impact. We've only got 2 fires here, and we can handle them. 5 minutes later, the entire building collapsed. No, I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. 3,000 architects and engineers in America have risked their professions to have us know the truth. We deserve the truth. Ray Downey's family deserves the truth. 343 firefighters were incinerated on 9/11. And I'm not going to stop. They're either going to kill me or we're going to know the truth. I never met Donald Trump, but Donald Trump 2 days ago said he's going to reveal the information about the JFK assassination, the RFK assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination. And now we're going to say we want the 9/11 information also. I don't want any conspiracies. I don't want the media doing this. I don't want some local yokel doing it. I want the best and the brightest analyzing the information. I know from the intelligence standpoint what they did. And I'm going to tell you one more thing. is going to shock your viewers. I know what they did with Osama bin Laden after 9/11. We sent thousands of American kids to Afghanistan looking for bin Laden. 2,500 came back dead. Thousands more came back injured. Yet it was America that knew and helped place bin Laden in Baluchistan after 9/11. He was allowed to roam in Baluchistan while we sent kids to die in Afghanistan. That's outrageous. It's unacceptable. I wrote about it in my first book, and you had the date wrong, but you had the title right. The book is called Countdown to Terror. I published this book in 2005. That's why they took me out of office. The year after I wrote this book, the deep state raided my daughter's house in Philadelphia 3 weeks before my election. And you know what, Jimmy? No one ever talked to my daughter, ever. No one. The raid was to impact my election because I was going to be chairman of armed services. I would have had unlimited subpoena power. They knew what I was going to do hearings on. They didn't want those hearings. They didn't want the American people to know the truth. They didn't want the firefighters to know what happened to their brothers and sisters. They didn't want the police officers to know. So they ended my career. But Jimmy, 3 months after that, I sent your staff just a few moments ago, and you might want to play it, the tribute done by George H.W. Bush to me in front of 2,000 leaders in Washington, fire leaders, members of Congress. After they raided my daughter's house, which also helped cause the death of my son, a few years later, President George H.W. Bush gave me a public tribute. You can show it to your viewers. You can see the video of him saying it himself. He said, Congressman Weldon, you're the kind of leader that America needs. Someone who leaves the country safer and stronger. Now that's George W. Bush, former head of the CIA. I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of people who lie. It's like Pete Hegseth said in his hearing to become Secretary of Defense. He said, if a soldier loses his gun, they're going to pay the price for it. If a general makes a mistake, they get promoted. I'm not going to sit around while people who are unnamed, anonymous, make decisions that kill people and get away with it.
So what was in your book that came out in 2005?
My book's about Iran.
What was it? What was it that was so threatening that made them want to take you out of office?
Well, what I did, I was a very aggressive vice chairman of both committees, and I was doing a lot of hearings on issues that are all front and center today. Russia, Ukraine, China, Libya. I could go through all of them. North Korea. I led all 3 delegations in North Korea. And I saw things happen that are scandalous, scurrilous, and are the reason, the same people that tried to kill Donald Trump. I know what they did. And I know why they want to kill Trump. I know firsthand. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. What they did to my daughter, they raided her house. Now, let me tell you something else. The agents sent from D.C. raided my daughter's house 3 weeks before my election. My elections were all landslides. 10 in a row. I would have been chairman of armed services. They raided a lawyer in my district who's a Democrat. They didn't bother to check that lawyer, at the time they raided his office, was a operative for FBI counterintelligence against Russia that I had arranged for the FBI 2 years earlier. So you had 2 sets of agents in one office at the same time. You had the counterintelligence agents that he was working for, thanking him and saying, Mr. Gallagher, please don't answer any questions. We don't know what this is about. You had agents sent from D.C. by Mueller. Sent by Mueller. And I know who was done. I know all the names. And they said, well, Mr. Gallagher, and John, my friend said, what do you want? I have nothing to hide. They said, wasn't it true related to Congressman Curt Weldon? And he started laughing at them. He said, because Congressman Weldon's wife's name's Gallagher, you think I'm related because my name's Gallagher? And you're from the FBI? Well, they knew they had been set up and they apologized to him. What they wanted a file he had. They wanted a file he had from a State Department senior operative in the Far East of Russia who broadsided a car with a 20-year-old Russian student who had relatives in Philadelphia who contacted their family. They wanted to get the kid rehab. They didn't want any money from the government, rehab. Well, that guy worked for our intelligence agency. When that guy was hired by our intelligence agency, he was the vice chairman of the American Nazi Party. And that file has pictures of him in a Nazi uniform. That's what they wanted. My daughter was never talked to by anyone, ever. The system has major problems right now. Trump, I predicted this would happen. They tried to get Trump because they know what Trump is doing.
What is that?
Well, first of all, he started off by removing the security clearances of 51 people who lied and said that the Russia scandal was all a part of Russia's interfering with the election. I'll give you the Newsweek Time magazine from the summer, July of 1996. I'll give it to you when I leave the show. It's a picture of Boris Yeltsin from Russia. You know what the headline is? Not by me, by Time magazine. Bill Clinton and America's secret plan to re-elect Boris Yeltsin president of Russia.
That's right.
So here we are, making a fabrication up about Trump and Russia while the Clintons ran Yeltsin's re-election campaign so they could get money. That's what's wrong with the country. And you know what? People are afraid to speak up. Two of my friends died. They work for the agency. And it may happen to me. But you know what? I'm now at the point where if that's what's going to happen, I'm not backing down from them. And I'm not some crazy man. George H.W. Bush wouldn't have said what he said about me if I was some crazy man. My current partners today are federal judges. My office in Washington is with Judge Gene Sullivan. They all know. But everybody's afraid. Everybody doesn't want to affect their budget, their money, their contracts. They know. Buck Revell was the deputy director of the FBI down in Dallas, Texas. They've all asked me to tell my story. And I'm going to tell my story. So the last thing I do, I'll tell my story. Because there are scumbags. There are good people in the agencies. Don't get me wrong. Good people. But there are scumbags.
So the deep state came after you because they were afraid of you getting a chairmanship.
100%.
And then taking a real look and having subpoena power to look into 9/11, the failures before 9/11 and the cover-up after.
And not only that, other things that I know of that happened. Yes, exactly right, 100%. In fact, Dennis Kucinich, the liberal Democrat, asked me to meet with Seymour Hersh. I met with Seymour Hersh. You know who he is.
Yeah.
We met and he said to me, "Oh, Congressman," I said, "You have no permission to publish anything." We met 4 months later. He said, "I verified every fact in detail you told me. They wanted you out. They went to Mueller, asked him to do a favor. And the favor was disrupt your election. They raided your daughter's house. Imagine, I have 5 kids. Imagine, I did nothing wrong. She did nothing wrong. They raided her house and never talked to her. This is America. This is America, Jimmy. It's America.
So what do you?
No, it's not.
What do you think you would find out if you were Armed Services Chairman and you were able to?
Well, I know what I know. I just would have brought it out to the public. I mean,
can you tell?
And again, in my time in armed services, I did a lot of things for our intelligence agencies. When I wrote this book, Countdown to Terror, you know who endorsed this book, Jimmy?
No.
Jim Woolsey. Do you know that name?
No, I've heard that name. Tell me who it is.
Former CIA director.
Okay.
He endorsed this book with a 3-page letter. And you see the title of the book? I Attacked the CIA. But yeah, Jim Woolsey endorsed my book. And so did Jack Caravelli. Jack Caravelli was Al Gore's CIA advisor. They both endorsed my book. What I said here is we're causing a war with Iran. The people of Iran are not our enemy. We've got to stop this manipulation with the intelligence agency in Iran that our intelligence agency was playing games with. You know what the Iranians did? They took my book and they translated it into Farsi. I went out to LA. You have a lot of Iranians that live in Southern California, about 1 million of them. They brought me out there. I did live interviews on Iranian TV and radio about my book. They took my book without me even knowing about it. They did tell me they were going to do it. I didn't ask for anything from. They published my book in Farsi. It became a bestseller in Iran because the book said, "You're not our enemy. The Iranian people are not enemies of America. We're friends. We've allowed people to make decisions for our country that don't act in our country's best interest. And until we take it back, it's not going to change. That's why this election was so important. And again, I don't know Donald Trump. I never met the man. But I know what was behind the attempts to kill him. And I still think there's a risk to him. Because what he's revealing, what he's going to reveal, and look, if we're going to be a true, transparent society, we need to know what our leaders are doing with American GIs' lives. If your son or daughter were sent to Afghanistan to look for bin Laden. Now, let me say something, Jimmy. When George Bush Jr. decided to go to Afghanistan, I was worried about our troops. Because when Russia was in Afghanistan, a lot of Russian troops were killed. You know what I did? I took 2 members of Congress with my intelligence friend Al Santoli, who was a decorated Vietnam veteran. We went over to Rome, where the king of Afghanistan was living in exile, Zahir Shah. I have photographs. We met with Zahir Shah to convince him to go back to Kabul and convene a Loya Jirga, all the tribal leaders, so they would not attack American troops when we went in. I did everything I could to help support our president and our troops when they went to Afghanistan. Then I find out, through 10 different silver bullets, bin Laden's not in Afghanistan. He's been given a free right to roam in Baluchistan. When I had my intel team telling me this, I went up and bought a map up the street from the Capitol. I didn't know where this town Ladiz was. I found it 10 kilometers inside the border of Pakistan in Iran. So I questioned the intelligence community. They never denied it. I have 10 silver bullets, 10, that bin Laden was placed in Baluchistan. And the quid pro quo was, as long as Al-Qaeda didn't attack us on our soil, he could stay there. Which means we sent kids to die in Afghanistan when a handful of people in our country knew exactly where he was. The Iranian government did not make the deal. The deal was not cut with Ahmadinejad, the leader of Iran. The deal was cut with Soleimani. You remember that name?
Yeah.
We killed Soleimani 4 years ago.
That was the general that Trump had killed.
That's the guy, and I don't think Trump even knew this then or now. That's the guy the deal was cut with. Soleimani, to place bin Laden in Iran. That's in my book that was endorsed by the former CIA director, Jim Woolsey, and by Jack Caravelli.
So you are petitioning Donald Trump to reopen an investigation into 9/11. Do you think you'll be successful?
Based upon his own views, based upon his public statements this past week where he said that he wants to give all the facts about the John F. Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, and the RFK assassination, and he said, and others. And he's talked to other people about 9/11 in the past. Now, look, I don't want to hurt the country. I'm a patriotic, I'm a teacher. I'm the youngest of 9 kids. I spent my life building up this country. I formed nonprofits to help poor people. You know, I'm a firefighter. I don't want to hurt this country. But this country can't survive if some unscrupulous bastards are allowed to make decisions that cause the problems that we've suffered through over the past 30 years since I was in Congress. And it started during the 90s under Clinton. I was on the Cox Commission. There were 9 of us appointed to investigate China's acquisition of our technology. They didn't steal our technology, Jimmy. I'll give you the charts on your show. And I was on the commission. The vote on the commission was 9-0. The Democrats and Republicans agreed. Our technology was auctioned off. The People's Liberation Army set up some front companies to use campaign money to buy our technology. The CEO of L'Oreal Corporation from California, Bernie Schwartz, was caught transferring stage separation technology for China's long-range missiles, which they didn't have, which were necessary for a long-range missile to hit the U.S. He was caught. They were about ready to indict him. And Sandy Berger, Clinton's national security advisor, arranged, now listen to me, a retroactive presidential waiver. A retroactive presidential waiver. After the technology had been transferred to China. Well, this stuff is not, it's not rocket science. But if you don't have people that are willing to hold our officials accountable and do their job, and there are good people in Congress in both parties, but it's out of hand now. You know, I grew up with Joe Biden. We grew up in neighboring towns, 1 mile apart. Our kids went to the same high school. When my son died, Joe Biden, as vice president, drove 3 hours and stood in line to come extend his condolences to my family. I'm not against anyone. I'm against the bad people that have gotten away with. There are good people in intelligence. Don't get me wrong, but I will not allow 9/11 not to be fully checked by experts. I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. But when 3,000 architects and engineers risk their careers to come out and say that the NIST report is a bunch of crap, that there's no modeling to support what they've said, that the Building 7 came down on its own because of explosives, that there was no investigation of explosive material after the attack occurred. And I was there at the base of Ground Zero one day after, walking in Ground Zero with the fire department of New York. When I hear that, that can't continue. Those 10,000 families that lost their loved ones, the 343 firefighters, the police officers, the Port Authority people, and the damage around the world, we can't let that just pass.
I agree with you. And, I think it's very telling if you, once you see behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. And so I have. And so when you see, I've been personally, just like you, the target of slander and to discredit and from powerful people. And so when the CIA weaponized the term conspiracy theorist, they did that because people were onto the conspiracy that led to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which it was a conspiracy. So if you thought it was, they wanted to, even though people are charged with conspiracy to commit crimes every day in every court from coast to coast, they made the term conspiracy some kind of you're a kook, even though law enforcement charges people with conspiracies every day. And we know it was a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. And there was certainly, all a conspiracy means is that two people conspired, created a plan to commit a crime. That's a conspiracy. That's all that means. And so what's even more telling is that they have somehow made the term truth into a negative, toxic term. So they call people who want to get to the bottom of the conspiracy around 9/11, they call them conspiracy theorists and truthers. So they've now taken the term truth and made that somehow ugly and toxic. The word truth. So that's what the intelligence community does. And I have to move on. We're way over time, but I want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
So I've shown the video of Chuck Schumer when Donald Trump was elected the first time in 2016. He was talking a lot like you, where he was talking about the deep state and the people who really run our foreign policy and the corruption, that he wanted to get rid of it. And Chuck Schumer was on Rachel Maddow's show, and she said that, and he said that, for a smart guy, he's being really dumb to criticize the intelligence community. And she said, why is that? And he said, because if you mess with the intelligence community, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you. And so, you've been a victim of that. And so what he was really revealing, that's called a gaffe in Washington when you accidentally tell the truth. And the truth that he was revealing there was that the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA do not work for the president. In fact, the president better watch himself because they're the boss. And if he gets on the wrong side of them, he's in trouble, not the other way around. So the next question she should have asked, which she didn't, which I would have, was, well, if they don't work for the president, who do they work for? Do you have any idea?
What are you doing, Schumer? What are you doing to stop it, Schumer? Do you have any guts? When the 9/11 reports comes out, the biggest people that will lose are Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton, because they're both from New York. And one more thing I'll say to you. This book was endorsed by Jim Woolsey. He was the CIA director. He wasn't some conspiracy theorist. He was CIA director. 3-page letter. My video, tribute to me, 3 months after I left office, was by George Bush, former CIA director. 2 CIA directors. Let the media counter that. 2 CIA directors publicly endorsed what I said, what I found, and what I know to be true.
And so do you have Can you give us your idea of who actually the intelligence community works for?
No.
No.
I don't think there is any one person they work for.
Okay.
I think it's a question of what can certain people get away with and not be held accountable for. And I found that when I was vice chairman of the Defense Committee, and this is what they do, they will selectively leak information to the media,
Of course.
which gobbles up unnamed sources.
Yes.
Then they go and report that as a story.
Right.
And as a member of Congress, I had to respond to unnamed sources. I was getting more unnamed sources information from the media than I was getting from a classified report that I was supposed to be given as a member of Congress. So I formed my own intel team. I had about 20 people that work for the agencies that I met with weekly. They fed me raw data. So I was getting it directly so I could challenge them. And that the problem is we need a good intelligence system. We need good people running intelligence. There are some bad actors in there. They have to be weeded out and held accountable.
Former Congressman Curt Weldon, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your efforts very much so, not only with the firefighters of America, but with trying to get to the truth out about now 20 years ago, the 9/11, what really happened before, what really happened during, and the cover-up afterwards. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you come back on sometime soon. I have a lot more questions, and I'm sure you have a lot more to say. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas, Austin, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Get your tickets at jimmydore.com. That's where they're the most affordable.